A special presentation of LLBN with archaeologists Dr. Lawrence Garrity and Dr. Doug Clark. Excavating the Bible.
Welcome to this edition of Excavating the Bible, what archaeology can teach us. This program is dedicated to exploring the contributions of Middle Eastern archaeology to our understanding of and appreciation for the Bible. I'm Doug Clark, Director of the Center for Near Eastern Archaeology at La Sierra University in Riverside, California, along with my co-host, Dr. Larry Garrity. Long commitment to La Sierra University as president, long commitment to archaeology, started our project in Jordan. We may even have some conversation with our guest about across the river. Dr. Robert Mullins from Azusa Pacific University. Is it a Department of Archaeology or is it a Department of Religious Studies?
Department of Biblical Studies.
Of Biblical Studies. So you do archaeological classes as well as
biblical studies.
Ones. Mostly Hebrew Bible? Mostly Old Testament? Or
mostly
both?
Old Testament I do, yes.
Right. And your experience in the field is fairly broad. Where all have you excavated that gives you the authority now to speak about these things? Really, that's what it does come down to. That experience, you know what it is. You watched it emerge, and you have something and some stories to tell. So,
well, I have to say that of the sites I've worked at, Beit Shean stands out because it was really the first major project I was involved in as a area supervisor. My doctoral dissertation was connected with that site. I then went on to neighboring Tel Rehov and continued working there. And went on to Turkey, where I worked at 2 sites in Turkey, in both cases supervising excavations. And now at Avel Beit Maacah, where I'm co-directing excavation there with an Israeli colleague of mine. So those are just some of the places I've done, but ones that I feel like I've been most involved with over the years.
But the site we're talking about for this particular edition of the program is the one that you now direct.
That's correct.
And you began that project, how many years ago?
Well, actually the idea first arose in 2011, so fairly recently. And my university, I was with the president and some members of the Board of Trustees and others on a tour of the Holy Land, for many of them their first tour of Israel. And about midway through, one of the board members came up to me and said, you know so much about these sites and even have dug in many of these sites. When is APU going to have their own archaeological excavation?
You didn't need to be asked twice.
I didn't need to be asked twice. And so that's how it got started. And in 2012, we had a survey. And in 2013, last summer, was our first full season.
We might point out to our viewers who know about Doug's and my work in Jordan, which in a way was founded by a man named Siegfried Horn, who was our mentor at Andrews University. When Larry Herr and I published a Festschrift, or a book in Dr. Horn's honor, we invited Bill Deaver, somebody well known to all of us, to contribute to it, and he chose your site to discuss, the most northern site in Israel, bordering right on Syria and Lebanon. And I remember him saying, this is a really important site that needs to be excavated. And so now you're doing it.
Yes. And I have to say that what Bill wrote in that Festschrift has been so important to us because it really provided the information that we needed to get a good start on our excavation. So
great. So our work is tied together.
Absolutely.
It is. And we're listening to each other, too.
Right.
That's good. What we want to do is to talk about the site, and we also want to talk about some artifacts that are on this table in front of us. We'll do that in a bit. But let's first begin with the site itself. A photo here. Tell us about this photo, which direction we're looking, what we see in the background.
Yeah, you're looking actually a side view of the tell, and a kind of towards the northeast. And in the background, you can see mountains with snow on it. That's Mount Hermon.
Right.
And many New Testament scholars believe this to be the mountain where Jesus was transfigured. So that mountain, of course, is in Syria. So it highlights the fact that we are the northernmost site in Israel.
And how most northern. How close are you? Well, maybe this map will help.
Yeah,
we'll see another one too.
Yes.
Go ahead and tell us
Yeah.
about the site and its location geographically.
Well, it sits really at a junction of roads. We have a road that comes out of Egypt along the coast of Israel by way of Megiddo, makes its way along the Sea of Galilee, and up the upper Jordan Valley past Hatzor to Avel Beit Maacah, and then continuing north into the Bekaa Valley of Lebanon and up into the Syro-Mesopotamian sphere. Coming east-west, you have Damascus, and that road leads by way of Caesarea Philippi, Tel Dan, one of the two cities with the golden calf, past Avel, and then on to Tyre. And certainly this was one of the reasons it was such an important site, because it really controlled these major routes of military movement and control, as well as economy.
I was going to say, it's not just the political benefits here, it's the
economic as well.
benefits of these trade routes.
Yeah. And given its location, we would expect to find artifacts that will be coming from the Phoenician sphere, from Tyre, from the Syrian sphere, Damascus, as well as all this area to the north. We know from ancient texts was a series of smaller Aramean kingdoms, of which Avel Beit Maacah may have been the capital of one of these Aramean kingdoms. So it's another thing that interests us in that. In a previous episode, we did talk about Beit Sha'an, where I worked. And Beit Sha'an is to the east of Megiddo. So if you would have continued to the east here, to the point where the Jordan Valley meets, that's where Beit Sha'an is. And you can see the Jezreel Valley as it comes out to the coast. So in many ways, Beit Sha'an being in the Jordan Valley at a key crossroads, Avel Beit Maacah further to the north, also in the Jordan Valley, and at a key crossroads as well.
The site's different in size, though?
Yes, Avel is much larger site.
And
yes.
we'll take a look at that
Yes.
and get closer to it. This is the modern name for the site.
That's
Arabic
right.
name.
Which Abil doesn't mean anything in Arabic, so it's preserving the Hebrew Avel, which means a meadow. And El Kameh in Arabic means the wheat. So literally it would be, if you take the Hebrew meaning, meadow of the wheat. And it was a Palestinian town up until 1948, when the war broke out and the inhabitants fled in the wake of the war. And when we made the decision to, yes.
No, so that's why we have the village
That's right.
here. Right.
We got all these houses here. This photo was actually taken in 1945 by the Royal Air Force.
So just before they had to leave.
That's right, before they had to leave. But it does illustrate one of the challenges we were faced with, because we didn't want to be excavating in any of the places where the houses stood, because our research interests were to try to get to the biblical period. So we felt like the places that are available to us would be up here in the northern end of the site, which is actually part of the upper city, okay, the higher mound, or down here on the lower mound, where from about this point on you can see, except for just a few houses here, this whole area here is pretty open for excavation. But it was a consideration we had to
Well,
face.
it's a sensitivity that we owe people
That's
who
right.
live there, and we pay attention to religious as well as
Right.
to other kinds of cultural issues, and we really must not. That's not always been the case.
Right.
Certainly in the past, there's been violations there, but that's important to be sensitive,
Yes.
and we learn what we can from the spaces we can excavate.
That's right.
In the process. Another map and a connection here with Aram, or we typically would connect Aram with Syria. That's
right.
typically how we would do that. So what
That's
do we
right.
have here?
Well, first of all, you can see the location of Avel Beit Maacah, that it's not only close to modern-day Lebanon and, of course, the northernmost site in Israel and also bordering Syria, but this would have been true in antiquity as well. And indeed, Syria of today was basically Aram of the Bible. However, rather than being a single nation state, you had smaller states. So you had Aram Damascus, Aram of Damascus. You had Aram Geshur, which controlled the area of the Golan Heights today. You had Aram Zova, which is probably up in this area somewhere. And there's an Aram Maacah, and I have a quotation here out of the book of Chronicles, which mentions how Ammonites hire charioteers from Aram Maacah in order to do battle against King David. It kind of illustrates, at least during David's reign, the earlier part of his reign, there was apparently hostility between Israel and Aram Maacah, being an Aramean city.
Not a whole lot has changed in modern times.
Not a whole lot has changed in modern times, yeah.
And I would say we've talked about the importance of the location, but also its vulnerability. I mean,
Yes.
a place located at the intersection of political lines is going to be pulled and tugged in different
That's
sorts of
right.
ways,
Yes.
and subject to a good deal of
Right.
destruction, at least potentially so. Another biblical connection
Yeah,
here.
and this is probably the most famous one. Towards the end of David's reign in 2 Samuel 20, there's a call for revolt against King David by one Sheva, son of Bichri. And according to the narrative in 2 Samuel 20, he makes his way from Jerusalem all the way to the north of the country to Avel Beit Maacah, where he takes refuge in the city. David sends his military commander Joab to go capture him. So we're told how Joab actually lays siege to Avel Beit Maacah, and in the process, a wise woman comes on the city walls and negotiates Sheva's surrender, which actually results in his head being cut off and thrown over the city walls. And so Joab takes that back to Jerusalem as proof that Sheva is now dead and no longer a threat to King David.
This is pretty unique, too, in that there are two references to wise women.
Yes.
One of Tekoa
Right.
in what would later become Judah.
That's right.
And suggests that part of this, what we would call the sapiential or the wisdom tradition
Right.
in ancient Israel was not simply one gender, that there were women who participated here
Yeah.
and who then were respected.
Yeah, well, and I think it's notable that she's the one who negotiates the surrender with Joab. And she doesn't say, oh, let me go speak with the elders or get permission. She makes the decision. So obviously she was a person of authority and respect.
That would be an encouragement to the women in the State Department today, wouldn't they?
Yes,
If they had
certainly
some
would.
predecessors.
That's right.
Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, I think that's certainly a nice modern
Right.
sort of parallel to make. But it does say something about stories, small ones, tucked away,
Yeah.
sometimes read over very quickly, that illustrate some important cultural shifts and thinking and practice that we normally don't associate with this patriarchal world and this patriarchal period,
Absolutely.
so.
And another interesting cultural shift is that the wise woman describes this site in this passage as being an Israelite city. And yet, earlier in David's reign, it appears to be an Aramean city. So at some point during David's reign, it seems that it shifted from being an Aramean city to an Israelite city. And one of the questions we have is, what does this mean? Is the population still Aramean, but the borders have moved, and so they've just become Israelite citizens? Like the Golan Druze, for example. One day before the 67 war, they're Syrian, and then after the 67 war, they're in Israeli territory. But they're still culturally and linguistically and every other way Syrian.
So would you expect any kind of evidence in what you excavate in artifacts, any kind of shift? Do you expect, I mean, sometimes this happens with a destruction, and those are so clearly marked, and we all know that, and we see the value of that, in spite of the fact that people suffered and died.
That's right.
Archaeologists tend to like those. But are we going to expect that? I mean, you have a lot of work yet to do here.
Yeah, absolutely, because we're just getting started, but it's one of the questions we're asking. It's one of the things we'll look for. Will we see a change in the material culture?
And what would you expect to find if there were a change?
Well, that's one of the big questions, because we don't even fully understand what these small Aramean cultures even look like archaeologically, because other than Beit Saida and Tel Kein Road near the Sea of Galilee, which is part of the kingdom of Geshur, we don't really know much about these Aramean kingdoms. And so one of the questions is, do they look more like Israelites, even though they might culturally be Aramean? Or do they have distinct vessels, building traditions that we'll be able to look at and say, this is something distinctively Aramean versus something that would be Israelite.
That's a question you have for your site. It's a question that occupies archaeologists across the territories. You watch for these shifts. Some of them are more important because of popular, whether you're in North America or Europe or wherever, popular expectations. Or you read the biblical text, and this is what the Israelites did, but this is not what the Philistines did. So can we see anything? I mean, that issue, whether it's Canaanites, Philistines, Edomites, Moabites, whatever, that issue is a common one and an important one. So we're looking to you for the answers and the solutions.
Well, hopefully we can provide some insight into that.
We'll look forward to having you back after you solve that problem.
That's right. Okay. A couple more texts.
Yeah, a couple more texts that are mentioned in the Bible. One is after the division of the monarchy, very early in the years of the divided monarchy. Ben-Hadad, king of around Damascus, conquers Ion, just to the north of El-Beit Maacah, Dan and of El-Beit Maacah. So one question will be, will we come across a destruction layer associated with this? The other reference comes from the year 733, 732, when the Assyrian monarch Tiglath-Pileser III really conquered the northern kingdom. And the beginning of his conquest, he captured Ion of El-Beit Maacah, but he's coming from the north. And so when you're coming from Aram and the Aramean territories in Israel, you're going to go right past El-Beit Maacah. So it makes perfect sense that the site would have been conquered by him. We do know that the Assyrians made use of siege ramps in their conquests. And one question raised by Bill Deaver in the very article you referred to in the Siegfried Horn Festschrift was whether this mound that you see here are actually remnants of such a siege ramp. This lower mound that you see here. His geologist, Reuben Bullard, said it's not natural. It's something man-made, but it is something we want to investigate. Because if it is a siege ramp, it would be the only other example that we have of a siege ramp except for Lachish in the south.
Where we have all the, from the British Museum, the reliefs that sort of picture what was going on there.
So how much of a temptation will it be, should you find a destruction layer that at least matches fairly close chronologically to the biblical stories, to identify that as such? And I don't mean to set that up one way or another, but some people are drawn quickly and make the identification and say this is where it happened. Others are more cautious. How are you going to
I will definitely be more cautious. Because there are always many circumstances that can result in a destruction of a city. And so just because the city was destroyed in the same century doesn't mean it was that particular destruction. So if we do find a destruction layer, we can say this is possibly to be tied to Ben-Hadad's conquest or Tiglath-Pileser III. Where I think would be more secure is if we find some artifact that you can definitely attribute to a particular king or a particular period and say, this looks very much like Neo-Syrian. Tiglath-Pileser III would be a good candidate for that.
What about the library? If you find the library,
you find the library or something.
Then or a signpost or something that indicate it. So excellent. Okay, now back to this picture again, and you now have placed some excavation units.
That's right.
So tell us what you're doing at each of these units.
So you see that there are two boxes here. The yellow box, it was in this area nearby the dirt road that you see here in the 2012 survey that we found a beautiful ring flask that you're going to see later. And it was very evident from walls that were protruding because this road that is here actually cut through the tell, exposing walls. You can see them in section. So we can see there's a whole sequence of occupation there. So we figured this is going to be a good place to dig, and it's nowhere in the area of the Palestinian village. And then the other area in the south is on the very southern edge of the tell, completely open there. We could see already on the ground, on the topsoil, we can see foundations of walls. And pottery belonging to the Iron Age. Also here, all the pottery was Iron Age. This is our research interest. So we thought that these would be two good areas. And of course, this being the very southern edge of the tell, we thought if there are fortifications to be found here, this is the most logical place to find them.
And archaeologists are interested in finding fortifications. And you can tell a lot about the history of fortifications if you do these trenches down the side. And so and that is another way to connect these things with particular chronological periods.
That's right. That's
and
correct.
is another line of evidence, of converging evidence, that might support the particular interpretation that you, you bring from it.
Yeah, so here you see that ring flask. Yeah, very unique. It appears to be 11th century BC, period of the Judges, Iron Age 1. And you can see that above it that there are some stones there that are parts of the foundation of a wall. It was actually found on a stone that looks like a threshold. So, but cut by the bulldozer that made the road. And so we were just cleaning the section just so we could see the walls protruding and came across this beautiful flask.
Now, a canteen would be kind of the modern equivalent, where
absolutely,
you would put maybe some kind of small rope through there to put it over your shoulder.
And just, put it over your shoulder.
If they're small and fairly light, you do that. The larger ones, maybe on a beast of burden of some kind.
This wouldn't be the same thing, but it's a similar kind of vessel, isn't it? Where you have the rope that goes through at the top and so on. But this one is, the donut hole is empty.
Right.
Yes, that's right.
Well, and this one would hold more water.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
So, okay.
And so just above the point where that flask was found, we started on ground level on the lower tell and dug down, and these are the walls that we exposed after 4 weeks. And all the pottery shows that we're in the period of the Judges. We're in the 11th century. But again, the biblical text would suggest this is when the site is an Aramean site. So again, the questions are we going to see unique styles of pottery that will tell us this is Aramean and not Israelite? And I have to say that so far the pottery looks very much like Tel Dan nearby, which is regarded as an Israelite site. So, so the question is still open.
And a lot of the pottery traditions really do extend across a wider area.
That's right.
We find a lot of materials at our site in Jordan that match the hill country of Manasseh.
That's right.
So these are tribal entities that all kind of sprang up at the same time. You talked about the time of the Judges, so we're what, around 1200 or so to about 1000. This is some round numbers too. And in that time period, a lot of common housing, architectural traditions. So these tribal groups then start forming into national entities with different sorts of pressures and
That's
stuff.
right, that's right.
Right.
So these are all domestic houses. In the debris of one of those houses, we found the rim that you see here of a chalice. It's a petaled chalice. Nicely decorated, but it's identical to one that was found at Tel Kinrot on the west side of the Sea of Galilee, which, by the way, is also an Aramean city, or should be. And so we're hoping to find next season a continuation of this. We might even get more of it, but it's a very, very nice parallel. And this is the collared rim jar. It was at one time regarded as kind of a type fossil, you might say, of the Israelites. But as you were saying, Doug, that these types of jars are known in areas outside the borders of Israel, and so aren't necessarily limited just to the Israelites, but could be used by other population groups, like the Ammonites, the Arameans, and so forth.
In fact, we have probably about 100 now from the one side of Tel El-Meri, from this particular time period. So early in this early Iron Age, and somewhere around 1200 BC. Now we have a chalice over here that doesn't look anything like that, because this is earlier, right? And all of these artifacts are from the later Iron period, and so we're talking about the time of the kings, the United Monarchy, and so on in the Old Testament.
Still the same class of vessel, even though they're a little different.
Oh, this looks like something an archaeologist could love, but maybe no one else.
But let me do what I can to explain it. I mean, first of all, this is Area F, which is on the very southern end of the tell, where we thought we might find a fortification. This is that very edge of the tell. From here, the tell drops down quite sharply. And what we found was a solid massive wall coming in, but what I want to draw your attention to is this corner. We actually saw this on the topsoil. So we knew we had a major structure of some sort. And as we dug down, what we realized that this is a kind of tower that you can see here. And then you have, it makes a corner and runs off this way. So what we think we have is a fortification wall, which are reinforced at different points by towers, square towers, and then running off to the side would be the narrower city wall. Then you would have more towers, city wall, more towers. So this is probably a tower that was on the very southern edge of the mound.
For support and perhaps for higher visibility? I mean, you could put a larger,
yeah,
higher
well, you would have
structure.
your city wall there, and at the top of the tower, of course, you could station your guards and so forth. So, but it's very poorly preserved, you know, and we're not even sure yet of its date because we're not down to the foundations yet. And as you know, it's only when we get down to the foundations and we get good floors running up to it that we can really securely date it. But we did find against the foundations of this wall.
There
this
we are
juglet,
at the foundation. And an important
and we found a jug, and inside that jug was found this silver hoard. Okay,
now, it looks kind of like a glob.
Like a glob of stuff, because what happened, you'll see that in the next picture, all of the jewelry cleaned. We've got hoop earrings of silver.
About these
okay,
pieces.
You can see we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hoop earrings. We have some sort of silver strand that's kind of woven. Okay, we have a silver ingot and other pieces of what is called hack silver. Essentially, before they had coins, they would make monetary exchange by having pan scales, and they would put a shekel weight, let's say, on one scale, and then in the other scale, they just take broken pieces of silver until it evens out, and then that is your unit. So this hoard of silver had been grouped together and glommed together and put inside this.
And you separated them out.
And put inside the jug, and this is what we have once we took it out and cleaned it.
And of course, the Bible does talk about the silver.
That's right.
Using that in exchange.
That's right. And I might mention that we just recently got back from the Weizmann Institute, lead isotope analysis.
In Tel Aviv.
At the Weizmann near Tel Aviv, that's right. And they say the source of this silver is in Spain.
Really? Wow.
And we know from its context that, and the jug that it was found in, it's late Bronze Age. So this is even before the Phoenician expansion.
Wow.
And before the time of the judges.
That's right. We're seeing, you know, silver trade across the Mediterranean, and the silver being brought in.
Very interesting.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Larry.
You're welcome.
And thank all of you for joining us for this edition of Excavating the Bible. We hope the program has provided some food for the mind and the soul, and we look forward to next time. Until then, think ancient, keep believing, and keep exploring. For Excavating the Bible, I'm Doug Clark.